Teacher told black janitor to solve calculus as a joke. She had no idea he was a genius. Maybe our janitor can help us? Dr. Eliza Hammond's laugh echoed through the physics lab, followed by a wave of laughter from the students. Lucas, you understand partial differential equations, don't you? After all, cleaning blackboards for years must have taught you something. In the quiet room at Preston Academy, Lucas Reed squeezed the broom handle until his wrinkled fingers turned white. At 52, with gray hair and a faded janitor's uniform, he had become invisible to everyone, except when serving as the butt of cruel jokes. What no one suspected was that those calloused hands, which scrubbed toilets and polished corridors, had once manipulated some of the most complex equations in the world. Dr. Hammond, in her impeccable blazer and rigid posture, pointed to the board full of mathematical symbols that had baffled the entire class. "Come on, Lucas. Show us your wisdom." His tone was sharp as a razor, each word distilling venomous superiority. The 17- and 18-year-olds, children of the elite, dressed in expensive Preston Academy uniforms, laughed openly. "He probably thinks derivative is some kind of cleaning product," whispered James Parker, drawing more laughter. Lucas stared at the complex quantum physics problem on the board. The modified Schrödinger equation, he recognized instantly. A problem that very few professionals could solve without consultation. A problem that, decades ago, he had helped to develop in a laboratory a long way away. "There's no need to be shy," continued Dr. Hammond, relishing every moment of humiliation. "We're all waiting for your genius." The black janitor, whose shoulders already bore the weight of countless daily humiliations, took a deep breath. His eyes, once full of passion for science, had learned to hide their pain behind a veil of indifference. But today, something inside him rebelled against the silence that had been self-imposed for over 20 years. In a corner of the room, Sophie Chen, one of the school's few scholarship students, watched the scene with growing discomfort. Unlike the others, she had noticed something in Lucas' gaze when he looked at equations or experiments. A spark that no ordinary janitor should have. Slowly, Lucas placed the broom against the wall. The whole room froze when they saw his determined steps towards the board. Professor Hammond's eyes widened, her mockery momentarily replaced by confusion. She hadn't expected him to actually accept the challenge. The chalk trembled slightly between his fingers when he touched it for the first time. How long had it been since she had felt that texture? 22 years. 22 long years since prejudice and life circumstances forced him to swap formulas for cleaning products, theorems for brooms. If you like this story of overcoming and turning things around, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more exciting stories like this one. The silence in the classroom was absolute when Lucas started writing. His movements were initially insecure, like a pianist returning to the instrument after decades. But soon, to everyone's amazement, his hand moved with frightening precision, tracing symbols, numbers and complex equations with the fluency of a conductor leading his orchestra. Dr. Hammond's expression slowly changed. The sarcastic smile faded, giving way to a growing incredulity that soon turned to pure shock. The students, once laughing, now stared dumbfounded at the incomprehensible display of knowledge before them. What no one knew about Lucas Reed, the simple janitor whom everyone treated as invisible, was that his past held secrets that could change the future of Preston Academy forever. But how had a man with so much knowledge ended up wielding a broom instead of a pen? And what would happen when the truth about his past finally came out? The silence in the room hung as if time had frozen. The chalk stopped sliding when Lucas completed the last equation with a precise, deliberate movement. Where once there had been an unsolvable problem, now there was an elegant, impeccable, and indisputably correct solution. Lucas took a step back and looked at his work. That's not possible," muttered Dr. Hammond, approaching the painting as if she didn't trust her own eyes. Her fingers trembled as she checked each line of the solution. "How did you?" The words died in his throat. The first to break the silence was Daniel Garcia, a chemistry teacher who was passing through the corridor and had stopped at the door, attracted by the unusual scene. "My God, is that the solution to Koshland's problem? Nobody can solve it without computational assistance." Lucas didn't reply. With the same quiet dignity he had displayed for years, he simply picked up his broom and began to walk away. The students, still perplexed, made their way as if they were in front of a strange and powerful phenomenon of nature. "Wait." Sophie Chen stood up abruptly. "Mr. Reed, you can't just leave after that." I have work to do, Lucas replied softly, his voice deep and controlled, revealing a slight accent that suggested years of formal education. The bathrooms on the second floor still need to be cleaned. The normality of his response, contrasted with the extraordinary display of genius, only intensified the absurdity of the situation. Sophie exchanged glances with her friend Theo Williams, another scholar, who seemed equally fascinated. Dr. Hammond regained her composure and her face hardened. That was some kind of trick, she declared, although her voice betrayed uncertainty. Maybe you've seen the solution somewhere. Lucas stopped at the door, his silhouette jagged against the light from the corridor. For a brief moment, something like a smile crossed his face. It's an original solution, Dr. Hammond. If I find this approach published anywhere, I'll be surprised. As the class dissolved into a chaos of excited conversations, Lucas resumed his routine, plunging into the anonymity of Preston Academy's empty corridors. But something had changed. The invisible weight he was carrying seemed slightly lighter. In the empty chemistry lab, Sophie and Theo chatted quietly during their break. I always knew there was something different about him, Sophie confessed, nervously fiddling with her bracelet. Sometimes, when I'm studying late in the library, I notice how he looks at the physics books with a different look. We need to find out who he really is, replied Theo, typing frantically on his laptop. Nobody solves equations of that level without a serious academic background. Over the next few hours, the news spread through the corridors of the prestigious institution like wildfire. The black janitor, the invisible man that everyone treated as part of the furniture, had solved a problem that not even the professors could cope with. Some laughed at the story as if it were an elaborate joke. Others began to silently question their own assumptions. Dr. Hammond, however, didn't find it funny at all. In her private office, she obsessively checked the solution she had photographed with her cell phone. Every line was perfect. Every transformation flawless. This threatened not only her authority, but the entire system of privileges and hierarchies that underpinned her worldview. I won't let a janitor do this, she muttered to herself, dialing Principal Peterson's number. There's something very suspicious here, and I need to investigate. Meanwhile, at the back of the academy, in the small utility room that served as a storage room for cleaning materials, Lucas opened a locked drawer in his rusty closet. From inside, he pulled out a worn leather briefcase, so old that the edges crumbled to the touch. His calloused hands caressed the surface as if it were a precious treasure. 22 years. 22 years of keeping his true self buried under layers of silence and resignation. When he took the janitorial job at Preston Academy, he swore to himself that his past would remain just that, past. But now, public humiliation had awakened something dormant, a spark of dignity that refused to be extinguished. Maybe it's time, he whispered to himself, opening the folder and revealing yellow diplomas, scientific award certificates and a faded photo of a young Lucas Reed in a laboratory, surrounded by state-of-the-art equipment and smiling colleagues. What Preston Academy didn't know was that the man who scrubbed its toilets and swept its corridors held secrets that could change the course of lives, including his own. And now that the first step had been taken, Lucas knew there was no turning back. The truth was like light. Once released, it could never again be trapped in darkness. The next day, when Dr. Hammond entered his office, he would find something on his desk that he would never have expected, a scientific article published more than 2 decades ago, with a theory that revolutionized part of quantum physics. And on the list of authors, a name that would now make his blood run cold, Dr. Lucas Reed, Ph.D. in theoretical physics from Princeton University. But what turned a brilliant scientist into a silent janitor, invisible to everyone? And what would happen when Preston Academy discovered that the man who cleaned its corridors had more knowledge than many of its renowned professors? The day dawned with a heavy silence over Preston Academy. Dr. Hammond arrived early, as usual, her rigid posture hiding the restlessness that had consumed her throughout the night. As she opened the door to her office, her gaze immediately caught a strange object on the immaculate desk, a worn leather briefcase. Her hands trembled as she opened the first document. His breath caught in his throat as he read the title of the scientific article, Innovative Approach to Solving Schrödinger Equations in Complex Quantum Systems. Published in the prestigious Journal of Quantum Physics, 1998. Main author, Dr. Lucas Reed, Princeton University. No. It's not possible, he whispered, frantically leafing through the other documents, diplomas, certificates, letters of recommendation, photographs. The evidence was irrefutable. The janitor she had publicly humiliated was not just a scientist, he was a forgotten legend. The door to the room opened softly. Lucas Reed entered, not in his janitor's uniform, but wearing a simple dress shirt and dark pants. For the first time, Dr. Hammond noticed his posture, upright, dignified, like someone used to running labs, not cleaning corridors. "I believe we have a conversation pending, Dr. Hammond," he said calmly. On the other side of the campus, Principal Peterson was calling an emergency meeting with the Board of Trustees. Sophie and Theo had spent the entire night researching and compiling information that they were now nervously presenting. Dr. Lucas Reed was one of the most brilliant theoretical physicists of his generation, Sophie explained, projecting old articles and photographs. His theories on quantum behavior revolutionized the field. He was about to receive the Wolf Prize for Physics when he completely disappeared from the academic world in 2001. "What happened?" asked the director, his brow furrowed with concern. "A scandal," replied Theo. "According to the records, he was accused of plagiarizing his most important work. All his awards were revoked. His career was destroyed overnight. And that's what turned him into a janitor?" asked an advisor, incredulous. "No," Sophie hesitated. "The accusation came from Dr. Walter Hammond, the late husband of our physics teacher." The silence that fell over the room was suffocating. Meanwhile, in Dr. Hammond's office, 2 decades of secrets and injustices were exploding in an inevitable confrontation. "You and your husband stole my work," Lucas said, his voice controlled but carrying the weight of years of repressed pain. "You used your privilege and contacts to destroy me. I was young black from a poor family. Who would believe me against the great Dr. Hammond and his wife, heirs to an academic dynasty?" Dr. Hammond paled, but kept her defiant gaze. "You can't prove anything. And even if you could, it's been so long." "It was never about proving," Lucas interrupted. "It was about surviving. When I lost everything, my career, my reputation, my dignity, I had to take the first job I could find. And do you know what I discovered? That even though I was scrubbing floors, I was still the same man. My mind was still mine." A soft knock on the door interrupted the conversation. Principal Peterson entered, followed by the entire board of directors and, to everyone's surprise, James Parker and other students who had witnessed Lucas' humiliation the day before. "Dr. Reed," the principal addressed Lucas respectfully. "Or should I call you Mr. Reed? Forgive me, I'm a little confused about the protocols in this extraordinary situation." Lucas smiled slightly. "Lucas is fine, Director." "Well, Lucas," Peterson continued, "we've just received a fascinating email. Apparently, 20 years ago, a young assistant at the lab where you and Dr. Hammond worked kept copies of the original drafts of your research. He never had the courage to make them public, until today." Dr. Hammond collapsed into her chair, all color leaving her face. "Not only that," Sophie interjected, reaching forward with her tablet. "Princeton University has just announced the reopening of the plagiarism case against Dr. Reed, citing conclusive new evidence that proves his innocence." James Parker, the student who had mocked Lucas, stepped forward, visibly embarrassed. "Mr. Reed, Dr. Reed, I wanted to apologize for what I said yesterday and for everything." Lucas watched the young man with kind eyes. "Thank you, James. But know that I don't hold grudges. Prejudices are passed on, we're not born with them. The important thing is to recognize them and decide to be better. Dr. Reed, on behalf of Preston Academy, I would like to formally offer you a position on our faculty. We desperately need someone with your experience and integrity." All eyes turned to Lucas, waiting for his response. 22 years of injustice were being recognized. A lifetime of silence was finally finding a voice. But Lucas didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on Dr. Hammond, who was now visibly shaking. "Before I answer," Lucas finally said, "I need to show you all something." He turned to the blackboard and began to write down a series of equations that no one in the room, except perhaps Dr. Hammond, fully understood. "This," he explained, "is the evolution of the theory that was stolen from me." What nobody knew was that that work was incomplete. For the last 20 years, while cleaning empty rooms at night, I've continued my research. As the equations filled the board, Dr. Hammond's eyes widened in shock and recognition. What she was seeing was not just the continuation of her research, it was her triumphant conclusion. My God, she murmured. You've really solved the paradox. Lucas placed the chalk on the table and turned to face the room, now in complete silence. So, Director Peterson, about your offer. I have a counter-proposal. What no one expected was that Lucas Reed, after 2 decades of enforced silence, was not only seeking justice for himself, but a complete transformation of the system that had almost destroyed him. And Preston Academy was about to become the epicenter of an academic revolution that no one could have predicted. My counter-proposal is this, Lucas announced, his voice filling the expectant silence of the room. I don't just want a teaching position. I want to create something new at Preston Academy, a special scholarship program for marginalized students with a talent for science. And I want half the funding to come from the Hammond family's personal funds. The shock on Dr. Hammond's face turned to indignation. That's extortion. No, Elizabeth, Lucas replied calmly. This is restitution. Not just for what you and your husband stole from me, but for what you stole from countless young people who could have benefited from the innovations my work would have brought over the last 2 decades. A month passed. The Preston Academy that had always exuded elitism through its marble corridors now vibrated with a different energy. In the former storage room, now transformed into an advanced physics laboratory, Lucas was guiding a diverse group of students. Sophie Chen and Theo Williams worked side by side with James Parker, forming an unlikely alliance. Professor Reed, Sophie called out, raising her eyes from her experiment. We've managed to stabilize the equation, but we still have a problem with the quantum vector. Lucas smiled. It was strange to hear that title after so long answering only to janitor, or on the worst days, not being called at all. Remember, Sophie, quantum behavior doesn't follow conventional rules. Sometimes we need to abandon everything we think we know in order to see the truth. Meanwhile, in Director Peterson's office, a tense meeting was taking place. Dr. Hammond, now without her usual air of superiority, was signing documents, her lips pressed together in a thin line of discontent. I think this is the last one, announced the director, sliding her another form. With this, the Reed Science Diversity Program is officially endorsed and funded for the next 10 years. You've ruined my career, she whispered bitterly. No, Dr. Hammond, Peterson replied firmly. You did that yourself when you decided to build your success on lies and prejudice. You should be grateful that you're not facing criminal charges. Dr. Reed was extraordinarily merciful. Beyond the walls of Preston Academy, Lucas Reed's story had become a national sensation. Newspapers, science magazines and television programs vied for interviews with the man who went from janitor to director of the country's most innovative science program. How have you managed to continue your research for all these years? Asked a reporter during an interview at the newly opened Reed Laboratory. Lucas looked down at his hands, now free of the cleaning chemicals that had been his companion for so long. My mind has always been free, even when my body was tied to a mop. As I cleaned empty rooms at night, I solved equations in my head. While waxing the floor, I visualized quantum models. Dignity lies not in the title we carry, but in the integrity with which we live. In the academy cafeteria, James Parker sat next to Sophie and Theo, his face marked by an unusual seriousness. You know, I never apologized to you either. Sophie raised an eyebrow. Why? For all the times I made jokes about scholarship students, about how you didn't belong here. James swallowed. I was like Dr. Hammond. I thought a person's value lay in their last name or the color of their skin. Theo smiled and held out his hand. The important thing is that you've changed. That's what Dr. Reed taught us. It's never too late to acknowledge your mistakes and grow. In the laboratory, Lucas was contemplating his final equation on the blackboard. The theory that could revolutionize not only quantum physics, but potentially open doors to new clean energy technologies. Something that could have emerged 2 decades earlier, had it not been for prejudice and greed. A gentle knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Dr. Hammond, looking smaller, more fragile, without her usual haughty posture. May I come in, Dr. Reed? She asked, her voice almost unrecognizable in its humility. Lucas nodded, watching her calmly. There was no triumph in his gaze, only a peace that she would never fully understand. I've come to tell you that I'm leaving the academy. She hesitated. And I've also come to ask for forgiveness. Not just for what Walter and I did 20 years ago, but for what I did, that day in the classroom. Lucas studied her for a long moment. Do you know what the worst moment of all these years was? It wasn't losing my career, or even my recognition. It was having to swallow my pride every day, while people like you treated me as if I were invisible. As if my existence didn't deserve even the basics of human dignity. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she muttered. It's not about what you deserve, Elizabeth, Lucas replied softly. Forgiveness isn't for you, it's for me. So that I don't carry the weight of resentment for another 20 years. As the former teacher left the room, Lucas turned to the window. Outside, students from all social and ethnic backgrounds were crossing the campus. Among them, the first beneficiaries of the READ program, talented young people from the poorest communities, who would never have dreamed of setting foot in Preston Academy. Sometimes, Lucas reflected aloud, justice doesn't come in the form we expect. Sometimes it comes slowly, transforming the world not through revenge, but through opportunity. 6 months later, in a packed auditorium, Lucas Reed finally received the recognition he had been denied for so long. The Wolf Prize for Physics shone in his hands, but his real triumph was on the proud faces of his students in the front row. Science teaches us that matter and energy are never really destroyed, he said in his acceptance speech. Only transformed. It's the same with our dignity. It can be hidden, suppressed, denied, but never destroyed. And when it is finally recognized, its power is capable of transforming not just one life, but entire generations. That day, everyone learned that a person's true value will never lie in their title, appearance, or social background, but in the strength of their character and the greatness of their contributions to a better world. If this story has touched your heart, leave a comment about a time when you saw prejudice defeated by the truth. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories that remind us of the power of human resilience in the face of adversity. After all, as Lucas Reed showed us, sometimes the greatest revolutions start in the most unlikely place, with someone the world tried to make invisible, but who refused to disappear.